My name is Clara Whitcomb. I am 32 years old, and the first thing the wedding planner asked me at my older sister's reception was whether I was there for catering or cleanup. He said it softly. That was the part that stayed with me later, not the words themselves. The softness. It felt like cruelty dressed as manners when spoken softly. I was standing beneath a crystal chandelier at the Seabrook Country Club in Virginia Beach. I held the invitation my mother had mailed me 6 weeks earlier, without a handwritten note inside. My dress was navy, old but pressed. I had fixed the loose seam at the waist myself the night before. My shoes were low because my back still ached if I stood too long. It was a souvenir from years of night shifts pushing a mop bucket down hospital corridors. The man at the check-in table glanced at my dress. Then he looked at my hands. "Are you with catering or cleanup?" I looked at him for one quiet second. "I'm the bride's sister," I said. His smile twitched. He checked the seating chart, tapped his tablet twice, then slid a place card toward me with 2 fingers. Table 19. They had printed my name as Claire Whitman. Not Clara. Not Whitcomb. My mother saw it. Marianne saw the wrong name, the wrong table. The way table 19 sat near the swinging kitchen doors, where servers came through carrying trays of scallops and champagne. She did not correct it. She touched my elbow and leaned in. "Please don't make this about you today. Evelyn has waited so long for a perfect day." I nodded, because nodding was the oldest language I knew in that family. Then I opened the wedding program. At 9:15 p.m., there it was. Launch of the Hayes-Whitcomb Veterans Housing Fund. Not a toast. Not a thank you. A launch the kind people write checks for before dessert is served. Underneath it, in elegant gold lettering, was the sentence I had written 5 years earlier on the first Harbor Lantern flyer. "Restoring dignity, one door at a time." That sentence was not decoration. It was the spine of the work I had built from night shifts, bus rides, donated coats, and men who slept in cars outside the VA, because nobody knew which form they needed next. That was when I understood. They had not invited me to celebrate my sister. They had invited me to watch them take the stage with the life I built. Welcome. Stay tuned. Before we begin, settle in for a story that won't leave you cold. Quick challenge. Check your phone battery. Above 40%? Comment 1. Below 40%? Comment 2. Let's see which side wins. Enjoying the stories? You can support our team with a coffee through the link in the description. Now get comfortable, because today's story takes a turn you won't expect. Let's begin. 8 years before Evelyn's wedding, my parents taught me the difference between support and investment. Support was what they said they gave both of us. Investment was what Evelyn received. She was 28 when she passed her real estate licensing exam. It was an achievement, and I will not pretend it was not. But the way my parents celebrated it made it feel like she had been sworn into the Supreme Court. My mother booked a private room at Bella Vista, the Italian place downtown, with white tablecloths and waiters who shaved Parmesan over your plate like a ceremony. The bill came to $2,940 before tip. My father did not blink. Russell Whitcomb stood at the head of the table that night, one hand resting on Evelyn's shoulder, and said, "Your mother and I believe in backing winners early." Everyone laughed. Evelyn covered her mouth, like she was embarrassed, but she was glowing. Then my father handed her a cream envelope with an $18,000 check inside. "For your brand," he said. "Headshots, website, staging course, whatever gets you in the right rooms." The right rooms, I remembered those words because 2 weeks later, I asked him for $4,800. Not for a brand, not for a website, not for headshots in a beige blazer against a brick wall. For my Ford Escape. The transmission had started slipping on the way home from my night shift at the VA hospital. I was making $14.25 an hour cleaning patient rooms, emptying trash bins, wiping down waiting room chairs, and restocking bathrooms where men twice my father's age sometimes cried because their bodies would not obey them anymore. I had picked up extra shifts. I had sold a bracelet my grandmother gave me. I had already paid half the repair deposit. My father read the estimate at the kitchen counter like it was evidence in a trial. Then he slid it back to me. "We're not financing bad life choices," he said. My mother was arranging hydrangeas at the sink for a bridal order. She did not look up right away. When she finally did, her face had that soft sadness she used when she wanted to sound kind while cutting deep. "Some jobs are temporary for people with direction," she said. "I'm just afraid you're getting comfortable at the bottom." At the bottom. That was what they called the place where I worked every night while they slept. So I took the bus. 2 buses, actually. The first one smelled like wet coats and old coffee. The second one dropped me 3 blocks from the hospital, near the employee entrance where the pavement dipped and held rainwater. Some mornings I got home at 5:40, changed in the laundry room so I would not wake anyone, and still rode with my mother to her flower shop when she needed help wiring roses for weddings. Free help did not embarrass her. Only paid cleaning did. The first person who seemed to understand, that was June Marlowe, a retired VA nurse who still came in twice a week because she said retirement made her feel useless. One morning, she found me asleep in the break room with my forehead on my folded arms, my shoes still damp from the bus stop. She set a brown paper bag beside me. Turkey sandwich, apple, 2 napkins. I opened my eyes, ashamed before I even knew why. June only said, "People who clean up after everyone else usually see more truth than the people standing under chandeliers." I did not know then how much I would need that sentence. I only knew that night, while I stood in the rain waiting for the 6:10 bus, my phone lit up with Evelyn's post from Bella Vista. A photo of my parents raising champagne around her, my father's hand still on her shoulder, like he was presenting proof of a good investment. The caption said, "Family always shows up." She did not call because she wanted me included. She called because the table needed another pair of hands. 3 years before Evelyn's wedding, Bennett Hayes came to dinner for the first time, and my mother asked me to arrive 2 hours early. I polished the silver, refilled the water glasses, folded linen napkins into the kind of shape she had seen in a magazine, and adjusted the hydrangeas until they leaned exactly the way she wanted. Marianne believed flowers could reveal family discipline. If a stem drooped, someone had failed to pay attention. Before Bennett arrived, she stopped me in the hallway outside the dining room and looked at my blouse. "If he asks what you do," she said, "just say healthcare." I waited for the rest of the sentence. She gave it to me. "You don't need to get into details." I remember the doorbell ringing right after that, like the house itself was saving her from my answer. Evelyn's laugh came through the foyer first, bright and practiced. Bennett stepped in behind her wearing a navy suit, an expensive watch, and the relaxed smile of a man who had never wondered whether one repair bill could end a person's month. My father liked him immediately. Men like Russell always recognized other men who walked into a room, sizing them up right away. Dinner started carefully. Roast chicken, green beans almondine, my mother's good plates. Daphne Cole was there too, because Marianne never missed a chance to make Evelyn look good. Daphne had been my mother's friend for years, the kind of woman who could insult you with one eyebrow and make everyone else feel rude for noticing. Halfway through dinner, Bennett turned to me and asked, "So, Clara, what field are you in?" I felt my mother's eyes before I saw them. I could have said healthcare. I could have protected the table from the truth. Instead, I said, "I work nights at the VA hospital. Environmental services. I also help coordinate supplies for a few veterans who don't have stable housing." The room changed without anyone moving. Daphne dabbed the corner of her mouth with her napkin. "Oh," she said. "So janitorial. How humble." My father gave a short laugh meant to hide how uncomfortable he was, and make everyone more so. "Clara's still finding herself." Evelyn smiled into her wineglass. "She's our reminder that college isn't for everyone." I had left because one semester cost more than my parents thought I was worth. Nobody mentioned how easily money appeared when Evelyn needed the right costume for the right rooms. At that table, facts only mattered when they made the right daughter shine. I looked down at my plate. I kept my hands still because shaking hands would have given them another story to tell about me later. After dinner, while Bennett and my father talked about property values in the living room, my mother followed me into the kitchen. I was rinsing plates. She stood beside the sink, close enough that I could smell her gardenia perfume. "You embarrassed your sister tonight," she said. I turned off the water. "By telling the truth?" Her face tightened, not with anger exactly, with disappointment, which in my family was anger wearing church clothes. "By not understanding which truths belong at a table like that." I nodded once, not because I agreed, because if I spoke, I knew my voice would shake, and they had already taken enough from me that night. But I remember thinking, as I dried my hands on a dish towel, that maybe my mother was right about one thing. There were truths that did not belong at that table. Mine was one of them. The night after Bennett's first dinner at my parents' house, I volunteered for an extra shift. I told myself it was because I needed the money. That was true. There was always some bill waiting with its mouth open. But the deeper truth was simpler and harder to admit. I did not want to go home and sit in a house where my mother's disappointment still hung in the kitchen like perfume. I did not want Russell asking if I had learned anything from the evening. I did not want Evelyn texting me some little heart emoji, pretending she had not laughed into her wine glass while I was turned into a lesson. So I went back to the VA. At 2:17 inches the morning, the hospital had a different kind of honesty. Daytime had clipboards, visitors, doctors speaking in careful voices, families trying to look hopeful beside beds. Night stripped most of that away. The vending machines hummed. Fluorescent lights buzzed softly above empty corridors. Somewhere down the hall, a television played too low for anyone to understand. The whole building smelled like disinfectant, old coffee, and the kind of loneliness people only let show when they think no one important is watching. I was restocking paper towels near hallway C when I saw him. A man in a gray janitorial shirt was mopping the same patch of floor over and over, even though it had been clean for at least 5 minutes. His shoulders were broad but folded inward, like he was trying to make himself smaller. One hand gripped the mop handle too tightly. The other trembled every few seconds. On his badge, printed in black letters, was N. Rowe. An older patient in a wheelchair rolled past with an IV pole and stopped for just a moment. "Commander?" the patient said. The man with the mop froze. Not dramatically, just enough that I noticed. His eyes dropped to the floor. "Not tonight, Mr. Alvarez," he said. The patient nodded as if he understood more than I did, and kept rolling. I did not ask him why a patient had called him commander. I knew what it felt like, when one word could drag your whole past into a room before you were ready. So, I walked to the break room and cut my turkey sandwich in half. I wrapped one piece in a napkin and set it on the edge of his cleaning cart. He looked at it, then at me. "You missed the corner by the vending machine," I said. For a second, nothing happened. Then he laughed. It was small and rusty, like a door opening in a house no one had visited for years. That was how I met Nathaniel Rowe. Not in uniform. Note under a flag. Not standing straight while people thanked him for his service. I met him at 2:17 inches the morning, beside a mop bucket, in a hallway where nobody clapped for anyone. Over the next few weeks, we worked the same wing more often. By the end of that month, Hallway C had become the only place where I did not feel edited. He did not talk much at first. Neither did I. We learned each other through little things. He liked black coffee but never finished it. He checked exits when he entered a room. He flinched when a metal tray hit the floor. He folded his paper towels into perfect squares before putting them on the cart. One night, after a thunderstorm made the lights flicker twice, he sat beside me in the break room and said, "I commanded men at sea, and now I can't command my own hands to stop shaking." He said it without asking me to comfort him. That made me want to answer carefully. "A uniform doesn't make a man honorable," I said. "What he does when nobody claps does." He looked at me then, really looked, like I had handed him back something he thought he had lost. I did not know those words would follow us for years. I did not know he would repeat them one day, in a room full of people who thought they knew what honor looked like. All I knew was that the next Saturday I missed my father's birthday dinner because Mr. Alvarez's discharge papers were missing. The night case manager had been pulled to another floor. Rowe and I stayed 3 extra hours making calls, finding the right desk, and making sure Mr. Alvarez was not sent out with nowhere to go before sunrise. At 6:08 a.m., my phone buzzed. A text from Russell. Good to know strangers come before family. I stood outside the VA employee entrance, the sky turning pale over the parking lot, and read it twice. Behind me, Nathaniel Rowe was helping Mr. Alvarez into a volunteer van with both hands steady for the first time all night. I almost texted my father back. I almost explained. Then I looked at the word strangers and understood something I had not been ready to understand before. My family had never asked who I was helping. They only cared that it was not them. Welcome, stay tuned. Before we continue, stick around, there's more to the story. Quick challenge. Are you watching with your legs crossed right now? If yes, comment 8. If not, comment 9. Let's see how many I guessed right. If you'd like to support the work, you can buy us a cup of coffee through the link. Now, get comfortable because this story takes an unexpected turn. Let's begin. By the time Harbor Lantern had a name, it still fit inside a plastic storage bin behind my apartment door. There were donated socks rolled in pairs, travel-sized toothpaste, 3 prepaid bus cards, and a notebook full of phone numbers. Most of them were crossed out because shelters filled fast, and people who needed help rarely had the luxury of waiting until Monday. June gave me old hospital clipboards. Rowe helped me sort coats by size after his shift, folding each one like it belonged in a department store instead of the back seat of my car. We did not call it an organization then. We called it Not Letting People Disappear. The name came from Mr. Alvarez, actually. One morning, after we finally got him into temporary housing, he squeezed my hand and said, "You people were like a lantern by the harbor. I could see where to walk." I wrote Harbor Lantern Initiative on the front of the notebook that night with a black marker. Underneath it, I wrote the sentence that had been living in my head since Hallway C, restoring dignity, one door at a time. For months, dignity looked small. It looked like calling 4 shelters before sunrise. It looked like sitting beside a man while he filled out a benefits form because his hands shook too badly to hold the pen. It looked like learning which church basement served dinner on Thursdays. It looked like knowing which county office would replace a birth certificate without charging a fee someone did not have. When I asked my mother if I could place a coat donation box in the corner of her flower shop, she looked at me as if I had asked to store garbage beside the bridal bouquets. "Homeless veterans in a bridal shop?" Marianne said, lowering her voice even though no customers were inside. "Clara, think about the brides." I did. I thought about women spending $12,000 on flowers that would be dead by Monday. I thought about men sleeping in cars outside the VA because nobody had told them which window to stand in. I thought about how easily my mother could make room for beauty and how quickly she ran out of space for need. I carried the empty box back to my car. That should have taught me. But hope is stubborn when it grows up in a family that feeds it crumbs. A few months later, Evelyn sent the link to her wedding website in the family group chat. There were engagement photos on the beach, a story about how Bennett proposed under string lights, and a schedule written in soft gray script. Then I saw the tab labeled Charity Launch. My stomach tightened before I even clicked it. The page opened to a stock photograph of an American flag folded on a white table. Beneath it was a polished paragraph about Bennett and Evelyn's lifelong commitment to serving those who had served, though neither of them had ever spent a night calling shelters after midnight. Then, centered in gold letters, was my sentence: "Restoring dignity, one door at a time." I read it once, then again, then a third time. Because sometimes your mind gives people you love extra chances reality never earned. I called Evelyn. She answered on speaker. I could hear traffic behind her and Bennett saying something to someone in the background. "Evelyn," I said, "that line on your charity page belongs to Harbor Lantern." There was a pause. Not long, just long enough for her to decide whether to lie softly or laugh. "It's not exactly original, Clara," she said. "Don't be dramatic." Bennett's voice came closer. "Is this about the veterans thing?" he asked. "The veterans thing," I repeated. He gave a small laugh. "Look, you're built for the work. Nobody's questioning that, but donor rooms are different. We know how to structure something people will actually trust." There it was again. The right rooms. Different words. Same door closing. By the end of that month, I needed $9,200 to secure a 6-month pilot lease on the first real transitional house. 4 beds, a working heater, a landlord willing to take a chance if I could put down the deposit before Friday. I brought my father a written repayment plan, 3 reference letters, and a folder of names of men already waiting. Russell looked at the first page for less than a minute. "No," he said. No questions. No pause. No hand on my shoulder. 2 days later, Marianne accidentally texted the family chat instead of Evelyn alone. "Your father transferred the $72,000 to the wedding account. Tell Bennett the donor dinner can move forward." I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. Then I took a screenshot of the wedding website. Not because I wanted a war, because I was finally learning that folks could take what you gave, show it off to strangers, and then call you selfish for asking for it back. 3 days before Evelyn's wedding, Bennett asked me to meet him at a coffee shop 2 blocks from my mother's flower store. He chose the kind of place with marble counters, plants hanging from the ceiling, and pastries arranged behind glass like jewelry. I arrived in my work shoes because I had come straight from the VA. Bennett looked at them, then looked away quickly. As if noticing them had been an accident, he wanted credit for not mentioning. He already had a folder on the table. Cream paper, silver clip. His initials embossed in the corner. "It's just a permission release," he said before I even sat down. "We want to use a few photos from your volunteer work during the wedding presentation." He slid the folder toward me with 2 fingers, the same way people passed me things when they did not want our hands to touch. "Nothing complicated, it just helps us tell the story cleanly." I looked at the title across the top of the first page. Media, naming, and affiliation release agreement. Cleanly. That word bothered me more than it should have. People only worried about clean stories, when the truth had edges. Bennett kept talking while I read. "Evelyn wants you included. Your parents do too. This is a way to make sure nobody gets confused." But the third paragraph was not about confusion. It said the Hayes-Whitcomb Veterans Housing Fund would receive permission to use Harbor Lantern's name, photographs, reports, testimonials, and housing images. The permission lasted 5 years. 5 years. Long enough to make a lie look like history. I felt my pulse in my throat, but I did not let my hand move faster on the page. "If it is only a few photos," I asked, "why does it mention naming rights?" Bennett smiled like I had mispronounced a word at a dinner table. "That's standard language. Lawyers put that in everything." He tapped the page with 1 manicured finger. "You don't need to overthink it. Donors don't like messy stories." I looked up then. "Messy?" He leaned back. "You know what I mean. Your work is admirable, Clara. But it's informal. Emotional. We're trying to build something sustainable around it." There it was, wrapped in compliments. He did not want to honor Harbor Lantern. He wanted to put a frame around it, hang it in a nicer room, and tell people the frame was the reason anyone looked. I closed the folder slowly. "Can I take this home and read it?" His smile thinned. "Of course. But we need it before the reception. The presentation is already built." That was the first honest thing he said. The presentation was already built. My consent was not the beginning of their plan. It was the decoration they hoped to add before anyone noticed it was missing. That night, I scanned every page and sent it to Owen Pritchard. He was the nonprofit attorney June had introduced me to months earlier, after Harbor Lantern became too real to live only in a notebook. Owen called back 20 minutes later. No greeting. No small talk. "Clara," he said, "this is not a permission release." I stood in my apartment with the folder open on the kitchen counter, still wearing my coat. "What is it?" I asked. I already knew, but some truths need another voice before they become real. Owen exhaled once. "It's transfer by embarrassment. They are counting on you being too ashamed, too polite, or too outnumbered to read what they're taking." I looked at Bennett's silver clip, shining under my kitchen light. 3 days before the wedding, they had not asked me to stand with the family. They had not asked me to tell my story. They had asked for 5 years of my name, my work, and the people who trusted me. And they had dressed the request up as inclusion. Owen told me not to sign anything. I told him I would not. Then I put the folder beside the screenshots from the wedding website and understood something colder than anger. They did not need me close to the head table. They only needed my signature. By the night of Evelyn's reception, the unsigned folder was still in my apartment, sitting beside the screenshots from the wedding website. That was intentional. Bennett had built his plan around pressure. He would catch me under lights and flowers and family eyes and make refusal look like bitterness. I knew that now. Still, knowing what someone is doing to you does not make it hurt less when they do it in public. It only helps you keep your face still. Evelyn's first speech came after dinner. The room was warm with wine and the kind of laughter people use when they want to prove they belong somewhere expensive. The charity launch was less than 20 minutes away. She stood beside Bennett under an arch of white roses my mother had designed, glowing the way she always did when every eye in the room agreed with her. She thanked our parents for teaching her ambition, and thanked Bennett for giving our family a bigger future. Then her gaze drifted toward table 19. "And to my little sister Clara," she said, smiling as if she were about to say something kind, "who has always reminded us to stay humble." The room laughed softly. Not a roar, worse. A polite little ripple, the kind people can later deny. Daphne Cole leaned toward the woman beside her and said, just loud enough for my table to hear, "Is she still cleaning floors?" My father looked down at his salad fork. My mother pressed her lips together, not in defense of me, but in warning. Then a server bumped a glass near the sponsor table. Red wine spread across the white linen like a wound. Grant Ellison appeared, glanced around, and for one stupid second, I thought he was looking for a towel. He just handed it to me. "Would you mind?" he said quietly. "You probably know how to handle this better than my servers." I looked at the towel in his hand. I looked at the sponsor table. I looked at the people watching, to see whether I understood my assigned place. Before I could speak, Bennett appeared beside me with a silver pen clipped inside his jacket pocket. He smiled like nothing ugly had happened. "Clara, quick signature before the launch," he said. "We're on schedule." He held out the signature page from the same agreement, clipped to a neat one-page summary, made prettier, made easier to sign without reading. "Just the photo permission. We simplified it for you." Behind him, the screen over the dance floor already showed the words Hayes-Whitcomb Veterans Housing Fund waiting in gold. I said, "I need to read it with counsel." Bennett blinked once. "Counsel?" His smile returned thinner. "Clara, it's a wedding, not a courthouse." That was when I noticed Tessa, Evelyn's 17-year-old stepdaughter, standing near the dessert table with her phone half raised. Her face had gone pale. Later, she would tell me Evelyn had asked her to keep me away from the donor table because I got emotional about my little project. But in that moment, all I saw was a girl watching adults teach her how cruelty dressed itself for formal events. I placed Grant's towel on the table and kept my hands at my sides. "No," I said. It was not loud. It did not need to be. Bennett's jaw tightened. For the first time that night, the perfect room lost its balance. And for the first time, the person losing control was not me. The word no did not echo the way I expected it to. It did not crack the ceiling or stop the band or make every guest turn at once. It simply landed between Bennett and me, small and solid, like a stone on glass. He stared at me, as if I had spoken in another language. Then he smiled again, but the smile had lost its polish. "We can talk about this later," he said, lowering his voice. "You're making it awkward." I looked at the screen behind him, still waiting in gold. "No," I said again. You made it scheduled. I stepped away before he could answer, and walked toward the hallway beside the coat check. I needed 10 seconds where nobody was looking at me like I had spilled something larger than wine. My hands were steady, but my chest was tight. Behind me, I could hear the room rearranging itself around my refusal, a few whispers, a nervous laugh, Bennett's voice smoothing the air for people who still wanted the evening to stay beautiful. That was always the trick. If something ugly happened under flowers, everyone pretended the flowers were the truth. I had just reached the hallway when I heard quick footsteps behind me. Aunt Clara? Tessa's voice was thin. I turned and saw her standing there in her pale blue bridesmaid dress, one hand wrapped around her phone like it might burn her. She was 17, old enough to recognize cruelty, young enough to be surprised when adults practiced it so neatly. She looked like someone who had just learned that good manners could be used as a hiding place. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't know it was like this." I did not ask what she meant. Something in her face told me the answer was heavier than one sentence. She looked back toward the reception room, then lowered her voice. "Mom told me to keep you away from the donor table." The words came out fast after that, as if once she opened the door, she could not hold it shut. Evelyn had told her I got emotional about my little project. She said donors might feel sorry for me, and the night would stop being about the wedding. Bennett had told Grant that if I started talking about Harbor Lantern, someone should redirect me before I confused people. Tessa swallowed hard. "I thought they meant you might be upset. I didn't know they were using your work." Then she showed me the video. The screen shook a little, because her hand had been shaking when she filmed it. There was Grant handing me the towel. Daphne's voice floated from the side, soft and poisonous, asking if I still cleaned floors. Bennett stepped in with the silver pen. My own voice came through quietly. I said I needed to read it with counsel. Then Bennett, smiling, saying it was a wedding, not a courthouse. Tessa swiped to another clip. This one caught Bennett near the sponsor table, speaking to Grant with his head turned just enough that he thought no one important could hear. "If she won't sign," Bennett said on the recording, "keep her out of sponsor photos. We can still call it family-led." For a moment, I forgot the music from the ballroom. I forgot the flowers, the wrong place card, the laughter. I only heard that one phrase, family-led, not veteran-led. Not community-led, not Harbor Lantern, family-led. They had not just wanted my signature. They wanted a public record, a room full of donors remembering the wrong story before I had a chance to correct it. That was when the anger came. Not hot, but cold enough to make everything clear. I called Owen from the hallway. He answered on the second ring. It sounded like he'd been waiting with the phone in his hand. I told him Bennett had tried again. This time with the signature page. I told him Tessa had video. I heard paper moving on his end. "I'm 5 minutes away," he said. "June is with me." After Owen read the release, he insisted on staying within driving distance of the venue for the launch. June refused to let him come alone. I had hoped they were both being too careful. Tessa wiped under one eye with the back of her finger. "Are you mad at me?" she asked. That hit me harder than Bennett's pen had. She looked so young, dressed like she belonged in a perfect family portrait, apologizing for adults who had used her as a velvet rope. I touched her shoulder gently. "No," I said. "I'm not mad at you." Then I looked past her through the open ballroom doors. Bennett was already moving toward the stage. "But the people in that room are about to answer for making you choose a side." Bennett reached the stage like a man returning to territory he owned. By then, his smile had recovered enough to fool anyone who had not seen his jaw tighten at table 19. The band softened into a polite instrumental version of something familiar. Servers stepped back from the aisles. The screen over the dance floor shifted from Evelyn and Bennett's engagement photos to a navy and gold slide that read Hayes-Whitcomb Veterans Housing Fund. Under it, my sentence waited again, bright and borrowed. I stood just inside the ballroom doors with Tessa beside me. She had stopped crying, but she still held her phone in both hands. Across the room, Marianne looked at me once, then quickly away, as if eye contact might make her responsible. Russell leaned toward her and whispered something. Evelyn stood near Bennett, smoothing the front of her dress with small, sharp movements. She knew something had gone wrong. She did not yet know that the thing going wrong was the truth getting a microphone. Bennett tapped the mic. "Everyone, if we could have your attention for just a few minutes," he said. "Tonight has already been the happiest night of our lives, but Evelyn and I wanted it to stand for more than celebration. We wanted it to stand for service." A soft murmur of approval moved through the room. He was good at that. He turned borrowed virtue into warm lighting. "That is why we're honored to formally introduce a family-led housing initiative for veterans in transition." A country club employee carried a leather folder onto the stage. Bennett accepted it with both hands, as if it were sacred instead of strategic. "We are especially grateful," he continued, "to have Commander Nathaniel Rowe with us tonight, whose support means more than I can say." My breath caught. I had known Rowe was on the guest list, because Owen told me Bennett had been courting donors with military ties, but seeing him stand from the second table near the stage still did something to my chest. Rowe looked older than he had in Hallway C, but not weaker. His suit was dark, his posture quiet and exact. He walked toward the stage while the room applauded. Bennett opened the folder and turned it toward him. "Commander, if you would do us the honor of signing as our first advisory sponsor." The applause swelled again. It was a beautiful trap. It was built with flowers, champagne, and witnesses. I stepped forward before the pen touched paper. "Commander Rowe," I said, my voice carrying farther than I expected. "Before you sign, may I ask if that document names Harbor Lantern?" The room shifted. Not loudly. Chairs creaked, someone coughed. Bennett's eyes snapped toward me. "Clara," he said, still smiling for the donors, "this isn't the time." I looked at the folder in his hand. "It became the time when you put my work in that folder." Commander Rowe did not sign. That was the first thing that changed the air in the room. He left the pen resting inside the leather folder. He looked down at the page as if he had found something there that did not belong. Bennett kept his smile fixed. I saw his fingers tighten against the folder's edge. "Clara," he said again, softer this time, "we can discuss whatever concerns you have after the presentation." He still thought timing belonged to him. He still thought embarrassment could be managed like lighting. Rowe lifted his eyes from the document. "Mr. Hayes," he said, "does this fund have legal authorization to represent Harbor Lantern Initiative?" The question was calm. That made it worse for Bennett. Calm questions do not leave much room for performance. Bennett gave a small laugh for the crowd. "Commander, Harbor Lantern is part of what inspired us. Clara has done wonderful volunteer work, and as a family, we wanted to bring structure, donor, confidence, and long-term vision to it." He said family like a hand placed over a mouth. "That wasn't the question," I said. My father stood up so quickly his chair scraped behind him. "Clara, sit down before you embarrass yourself." There it was. Not before you lose something. Not before they take your name. Before you embarrass yourself. Even then, with my work inside Bennett's folder and my sentence on the screen, my father's first instinct was to protect the room from my voice. I turned toward him, and for the first time in my life, I did not feel 12 years old under that tone. "Dad," I said, "he's asking about authorization, not obedience." A sound moved through the guests, low and uncertain. Marianne brought one hand to her necklace. Evelyn looked at Tessa across the room, and the look on her face was not confusion. It was warning. Tessa stepped closer to the hallway wall, but did not lower her phone. Bennett saw that too. His smile slipped for half a second, then returned thinner than before. "This is being blown out of proportion," he said. "Clara was asked to sign a simple photo release. She misunderstood the purpose." Owen's voice came from behind me. "No, she understood it exactly." He walked in without rushing, his suit slightly wrinkled from the drive, June Marlowe beside him with a folder tucked under one arm. Owen did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Mr. Hayes asked Miss Whitcomb to sign a media, naming, and affiliation release agreement 3 days ago. She declined. The document in your hand appears to proceed, as if that permission exists. Bennett's face changed then. Not much. Just enough for the people nearest the stage to see the mask pull tight. Rowe turned the folder toward him. So you requested permission, did not receive it, and continued publicly presenting the work as family-led? Bennett shook his head. That is not a fair characterization. From beside the ballroom doors, Tessa's voice came small but clear. It is. You told Mr. Ellison to keep her out of sponsor photos if she would not sign. Bennett looked at her like she had broken a rule he had forgotten to make out loud. Then he made the mistake that ended the old version of the room. He looked back at me and said, Clara is confusing cleaning floors with running an organization. The sentence landed harder than the word no had. For a moment, nobody moved. Even the band seemed to understand that music no longer belonged in that room. Bennett stood under the gold letters, with the folder still open in his hands, looking almost relieved, as if he had finally said the thing he believed all along. Then Commander Rowe closed the folder with one careful motion and stepped away from the signing table. Actually, Mr. Hayes, he said, I once worked as her janitor. Bennett blinked. Commander, I think there has been a misunderstanding. No, Rowe said. The misunderstanding is yours. He turned slightly, not toward Bennett, but toward the room. 7 years ago, I worked nights at the VA hospital. Gray shirt, plastic badge, mop bucket. I had commanded men at sea. I was so broken I could barely walk into a room without checking every exit. His voice did not shake. That was what made it hit so hard. Clara Whitcomb did not use me as a story. She did not pity me. She shared half a sandwich with me at 2:17 inches the morning. She told me a uniform does not make a man honorable. What he does when nobody claps does. I heard someone inhale, sharply near the front table. June stepped forward then, and placed her folder on the signing table. Harbor Lantern started with a notebook, a coat bin, and calls made after midnight, she said. Not with Hayes-Whitcomb. Not with a wedding website. She opened the folder. These are hospital confirmations, shelter referrals, and names of 312 veterans connected to services through Clara's work. Owen followed with the documents, one by one. The original Harbor Lantern flyer, the wedding website printout, the unsigned release agreement, the pledge page in Bennett's folder. Each piece landed quietly. Somehow that made the room feel louder. Evelyn finally spoke. We were trying to give her exposure. I looked at her. You put me at table 19 and spelled my name wrong. That was not exposure, that was distance, Daphne muttered. This is inappropriate. Tessa's voice came from behind me. No. What was inappropriate was all of you laughing. She lifted her phone. Bennett's own voice filled the air. If she won't sign, keep her out of sponsor photos. We can still call it family-led. Grant Ellison turned red. You told me to keep her away from sponsors, he said, pointing at Bennett as if blame were a hot plate burning his hands. Bennett looked around for a place to set the lie down and found no empty surface. Commander Rowe removed the pen from the folder and set it down on the table. I will not sign this, he said, and I will advise every donor in this room not to attach their name to anything using Harbor Lantern's work without Miss Whitcomb's authorization. Then, he looked at Bennett. You tried to borrow her dignity for your donors. Tonight, you return it in front of them. For a few seconds after Commander Rowe spoke, no one moved toward the cake, the champagne, or the dance floor. The room had been built to celebrate Evelyn. White roses, gold lettering, polished glasses, soft music waiting for its cue. But all anyone could see now was the unsigned folder on the table, and Bennett standing behind it with nothing left to perform. One of the donors near the front closed his checkbook. Another woman stood and said, quietly but clearly, if Miss Whitcomb is not the legal representative, our pledge is paused. Bennett stepped toward Rowe so quickly that 2 guests moved back from him. Commander, he said, voice low, let's not punish veterans over a family misunderstanding. Rowe did not even look angry. That made his answer worse. Veterans are not props for your misunderstanding. The country club manager walked onto the stage and asked the technician to remove the donation slide. The gold letters disappeared from the screen. For the first time all night, the wall behind Bennett was blank. Grant Ellison tried to slip toward the side exit, but Tessa had already sent the video to the event manager. Within minutes, someone was speaking to him near the coat check, his face red, his hands moving too much. Daphne Cole told the women at her table. I only repeated what I'd heard. June looked at her and said, "That is how cruel people stay clean. They call it repeating." Daphne looked down first. I remember that. Small defeats can be quieter than apologies, but sometimes they tell the truth better. Evelyn found me near the hallway, still in her wedding dress, mascara gathered beneath one eye. "You ruined my wedding," she said. I looked at the white roses behind her, the flowers my mother had spent weeks arranging around a lie. "No, Evelyn," I said. "I interrupted the part where you used my life as decoration." Her mouth opened, then closed. Behind her, Bennett was arguing with my father about optics, donors, and who had approved which wording. They were not a family anymore in that moment. They were a board meeting looking for someone to blame. My father came next. "You could have handled this privately," Russell said. I almost laughed, but I was too tired. "You humiliated me publicly. You ignored me publicly. You let them steal from me publicly. Why is privacy only important when consequences arrive?" He had no answer for that. My mother reached for my hand and cried. "I was trying to protect your sister's day." I pulled my hand back gently. "You protected her from embarrassment," I said. "You never protected me from cruelty." A week later, the real signing happened in Norfolk, inside the first Harbor Lantern transitional house. No chandelier, no champagne, just 28 keys hanging on a wooden board, and folding chairs borrowed from a church basement. Rowe was there. June was there. Owen was there. Tessa came too, carrying the table 19 place card in her purse. My name was still wrong. Claire Whitman. I looked at it once. I dropped it into the recycling bin. Rowe handed me the first key and said, "For the woman who understood dignity, before anyone paid her to talk about it." I held it in my palm, small and bright and real. I used to think the worst thing they did was place me near the kitchen doors. But table 19 was never my place. It was only where they put me before I learned how to stand up.